Lightweight. Classed as the greatest division in UFC history, from the massive champions that we've had to the super fights to the big personalities, lightweight's always been classed as one of the biggest divisions in the UFC, so I'm going to create a 32-man all-time lightweight tournament, including the GOATs of the lightweight division, the modern best fighters, lightweight legends, just a bunch of other big lightweight names that I think deserve to get a spot on this lightweight tournament. So we're going to be doing it by spin the wheel, spinning a bunch of names together, see who ends up against who in the tournament, and we'll start off with the first matchup in round one, which is going to be prime Conor McGregor versus Kevin Lee. Now, I'm talking about the McGregor that fought Eddie Alvarez. If we're talking about this version of Conor McGregor, he's starching out Kevin Lee. This one doesn't really need too much explanation. Kevin Lee, Motown Female in his prime. He was a talented dude, hit pretty hard. I still remember that head kick KO he had over Gregor Gillespie, but he gets clipped easily by Conor McGregor. Kevin Lee was super hittable. Prime McGregor, especially the one that fought Eddie Alvarez, which in my opinion is the best McGregor we've seen. He starches out Kevin Lee. Easy win for Conor McGregor. Picks him apart, finishes him in the first. Kevin Lee was dangerous, too hittable, and it showed in the later career that he had a bit of a glass jaw too, so McGregor easily starches out Kevin Lee. Next fight, Michael Chandler versus Michael Johnson. I'm going to go with Michael Johnson to beat Michael Chandler. 2-4 Michael Chandler ain't beating Michael Johnson. If we're going prime for prime, I'm picking Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson's underrated at 155. This guy's knocked out the likes of Dustin Poirier. He's beaten some good guys in the UFC. That war he had with Justin Gaethje. And even nowadays, even though he's not even in his prime, he's still beating these young, hungry guys like Daniel Zellweger, for example. Michael Johnson's a fucking dangerous dude at 155. Legit KO power in his hands. He could show up and beat Islam Makhachev, then lose to a debutant in his next fight. You put him against Michael Chandler, who's one of the goofiest fighters in the UFC. This, you know, I don't know how to describe Michael Chandler's style. It seems like he's an athletic freak. He relies on the athleticism. I can easily see him getting chinned by Michael Johnson. One big shot from Michael Johnson against Michael Chandler, who tends to be quite chinny and hittable. I'm going to go Michael Johnson to KO Michael Chandler. I genuinely see this happening, so I think prime for prime, I'm going to go Michael Johnson to beat Chandler. And then for Edson Barboza versus Nate Diaz. Obviously, both of these guys have kind of only fought at 155 a few times. Barboza's been at featherweight quite a bit. Diaz has been at welterweight quite a bit, but they both have fought at 155, so if we had to, you know, think of a theoretical 155 matchup, I'm going to go Edson Barboza in a 3-rounder to beat Nate Diaz. Yeah, I think prime Edson Barboza, even though he has done work at featherweight and lightweight, he is one of the best kickers, one of the best pure kickers we've seen in the UFC, and I just see him beating the crap out of Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz doesn't really do well against overly technical strikers. We saw it in the fight with Benson Henderson before, and he tends to be quite hittable, does Nate Diaz. His entire thing is wearing people out by taking shots to the face. If it's a 5-rounder, I can see Nate Diaz winning this one. I think he could wear out Edson Barboza in the later rounds. But in a 3-round fight, I'm picking prime Edson Barboza to beat the shit out of Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz, his whole thing is getting the shit beaten out of him and then having a moment. Edson Barboza in the 3-rounder, prime for prime, picks apart Nate Diaz and, you know, beats him to a pulp, to be honest. So I'm going to go prime Edson Barboza to beat Nate Diaz. Charles Oliveira versus Eddie Alvarez. This will actually be a banger of a fight as well. If we're going prime for prime when Alvarez was a champion and when Oliveira was a champion, it would be good, but I'm going to go Charles Oliveira to beat Eddie Alvarez. I know Oliveira kind of gets a lot of, I don't want to say disrespect, but I feel like people are looking at the current Oliveira. Bro, the run that Oliveira won on in 2021, I think that version of Oliveira, still to this day, is one of the most dangerous dudes we've seen at 155. I think it would be a fun fight. I think Eddie Alvarez would make it an absolute war on the feet. I think he'd hit Oliveira with some big shots. I think Oliveira would fire back. I can see it being a bit of a scrap on the feet, but I think ultimately Oliveira would get a submission of Eddie Alvarez. Like, I can see Eddie Alvarez doing some dumb shit because Alvarez did have questionable fight IQ. I can see him like shooting a takedown over Oliveira or getting dropped in an exchange and then Oliveira latches up the back. I think it would be very competitive on the feet, and I think Eddie Alvarez would have a chance on the feet, but I don't see him starching Oliveira. And I think when it does get to the ground and when the grappling exchanges does initiate, I'm going to have to go with Oliveira to submit Eddie Alvarez. So I'm going to go Oliveira to beat Eddie Alvarez, prime for prime. I'm going 2021 Oliveira to win that one. And then Dan Hooker versus Benson Henderson. I'm going to go with Dan Hooker to win this one. I think a lot of old heads are going to be going for Benson Henderson in this matchup. I'm going to go with Dan Hooker, and it's not just a case of, oh, modern fighters are better than older fighters, but it's more of a stylistic thing. I can see this going very similar to Gamrot versus Dan Hooker, where, you know, Gamrot, in this case, Benson Henderson, has a lot of success with the wrestling, but Dan Hooker forces a fight to him on the feet. Obviously, there's going to be times when Benson Henderson does well with the wrestling, and Benson Henderson was kind of the new breed of dynamic strikers at 155, but I can see Dan Hooker just forcing him into a brawl. Benson Henderson tended to not do well when he got in these brawly type of fights. He likes to keep it technical. You put him against a dogfighter in Dan Hooker, who's made it, you know, close with a lot of the top guys in the current era. I think Hooker wins that fight. And Benson Henderson, even in his prime, went to a lot of close decisions, like the one with Frankie Edgar. He was kind of the king of split decisions for a while, so it would be a very close fight. It would definitely be like a very 50-50 kind of type matchup, but I'm going to go with current Dan Hooker at his prime to beat Benson Henderson in his prime. And then for Gregor Gillespie versus Donald Cerrone, this is an easy win for Gregor Gillespie. I think Gregor Gillespie, yeah, makes easy work of Donald Cerrone. Gregor Gillespie, is one of lightweight's best wrestlers, and still to this day, he's one of the biggest what-ifs in UFC history. He never really beat anybody elite, but I think prime for prime, bro, I'm going Gregor Gillespie to win this one. He was one of the nastiest wrestlers we've seen at 155. People were comparing him to Khabib, saying he's like the next version of Khabib, saying that he could be the guy to beat Khabib. His wrestling was next level. The pressure that he put on people, the stamina that he had, the submission ability in the ground and pound, and how dangerous this dude was. This guy had a ton of potential at 155, and yeah, I think it'd have been a fucking problem for Donald Cerrone. Not that Cerrone was necessarily a bad grappler, but we've seen Cerrone struggle with wrestlers historically in the past. That kind of seems to be a bit of a flaw for Donald Cerrone. The submission guys, the submission wrestlers. So prime for prime, 2021 Gregor Gillespie, I guess 2019 Gregor Gillespie. I'm picking him to beat Donald Cerrone. Cerrone probably lights him up on the feet, but I think the grappling that Gregor Gillespie had, he'd be able to wear out Donald Cerrone across a 3-rounder. I'm gonna go Gregor Gillespie, one of the most underrated lightweights, and one of the biggest what-ifs as well, to beat Donald Cerrone. And then 4. Ilia Topuria versus Diego Lopes, two 155ers. Now, the reason I've included Diego Lopes is because the guy's at 145. He's one of the best. He's one of the scrappers. I thought it'd be good to include him in this list, but if these guys were to have a theoretical matchup, yeah, I'm going to go with Ilia Topuria to beat Diego Lopes. I mean, the whole thing about Diego Lopes is very fucking dangerous defensively, but he gets hit too often. That's kind of why people call him a blockhead. He gets hit a lot, does Diego Lopes. Even in his most recent fight with Gene Silva, he was getting tagged a lot. The fight with Volkanovski, he was getting caught a lot by Volkanovski too, and he kind of gets hit way too much, does Diego Lopes. You put him against the biggest puncher at lightweight right now in Ilia Topuria, the guy who has metal in his hands. I think he starches Lopez. I think Lopez would probably have one of the better chins, but we've seen Topuria against guys with iron chins before, like Max Holloway, and he's put them out. I think Topuria would put Diego Lopez out. It would be a good fight, you know, for a couple of minutes when Diego Lopez is firing back, but the blockhead gets caught by a big shot, probably gets knocked out by Ilia Topuria. At 155, I'm going to go Topuria by knockout. And then for Sean Shirk versus Dustin Poirier, Sean Shirk won't be one of the first 155ers in the UFC. Yeah, Poirier wins this one pretty comfortably. I mean, it's an easy case of, you know, modern fighters against older fighters. Sean Shirk was a good fighter in his era back in the early 2000s. Dustin Poirier, I mean, I shouldn't have to explain this one. He knocks out Sean Shirk early on. The boxing's on a completely different level. Pieces up Sean Shirk, gets the finish. Yeah, goes without saying, Dustin Poirier beats Sean Shirk. And then for Patricio Pitbull versus Islam Makhachev, Pitbull was one of the biggest names at 145, and I guess you could kind of make 155 as well in his prime. You put him against one of the best in nowadays in Islam Makhachev. Yeah, I'm going to go Islam Makhachev as well to beat Patricio Pitbull, especially how we've seen Pitbull perform at 145. Easy work for Islam Makhachev. He'd take down Patricio Pitbull. I don't care about the jiu-jitsu that Pitbull has. Makhachev would take him down, and he'd dominate him easily. Even on the feet as well. I know Pitbull was a bit of a KO artist. He's knocked out the likes of Michael Chandler, but even on the feet, I think Makhachev would do numbers to him on the feet. Way too big as well. He's Islam Makhachev. We've seen people get submitted before by AJ McKee, so yeah, I think Islam Makhachev would ragdoll Patricio Pitbull. Takes him down with ease, gets the submission, goes very similar to the Oliveira fight in my opinion. Kind of competitive on the feet until Makhachev takes him down, gets the submission or ground and pound win. Well, likely submission over Patricio Pitbull, so I'm going Makhachev to beat Prime Pitbull. And then Frankie Edgar versus BJ Penn. I mean, considering, I'm going to go Frankie Edgar considering we've seen this fight 3 different times, and Frankie Edgar has won every single one of them. I've got to go with Frankie Edgar. I mean, we've seen it 3 times. Prime for prime, both of them were in the prime. I don't even need to explain that one. Justin Gaethje versus Anthony Pettis. This is one of those fantasy fights at 155. One of those fights that I waited like between 2 guys in, you know, I guess 2 different eras that I would have loved to see fight each other. But I'm going to go with Justin Gaethje. In his prime, Justin Gaethje. I guess prime Gaethje was the one that beat Poirier the second time. He kind of fell off since then. I'm going prime Justin Gaethje to beat Anthony Pettis, to be honest. It would be an absolute banger. I can see Justin Gaethje giving a fight to Anthony Pettis, forcing him into a dogfight on the feet. I can see Anthony Pettis giving it back to Gaethje. I can see it being a complete scrap across 3 rounds, or even a 5-rounder where it's just one of those, you know, all-out wars, one of those bloodbaths. But I think Gaethje gets the job done. I'm going to go with Justin Gaethje to beat Anthony Pettis. I think the leg kicks of Justin Gaethje. I do think Pettis would be a fucking tough matchup for Gaethje. It is kind of one of those 50-50 fights, but I'm leaning towards Justin Gaethje. You know, this guy's always been at the top of 155 since he's joined the UFC. He's always made it competitive. The only guys he's really lost to is championship level guys or guys who are literally touching the title picture. So I'm gonna pick him to beat Prime Pettis, even though again Pettis was, you know, at the top in his era as well. It will be a banger of a fight. I'm going to go Justin Gaethje to get this one done though. And then for Paddy Pimblett versus Max Holloway, 2 guys in the modern era. Yeah, I'm going to go Max Holloway to beat Paddy Pimblett. I do think Paddy Pimblett makes it very competitive with a lot of the top 155ers nowadays. I don't see a fight with Max Holloway going too well for Paddy Pimblett. I think Paddy Pimblett, I mean, historically, he's known for getting not chinned, but he's known for getting caught on the feet. He's known for not having the best defense. He's been clipped a lot. And I think Max Holloway just has a field day standing. I can see Max Holloway completely picking him apart on the feet, keeping the fight standing, and just completely teeing off on Paddy Pimblett, who's a bit of a weird status striker as Paddy Pimblett, a bit awkward on the feet, bit of a leg kick spammer. I see Holloway completely beating the shit out of Paddy Pimblett on the feet, making it a complete one-sided beatdown on the feet, similar to the Justin Gaethje fight. Now, obviously, Paddy Pimblett's got the grappling, but we've not really seen Max Holloway struggle against too many grapplers. I mean, to be fair, he hasn't really fought any, but I don't see Paddy Pimblett being the biggest threat. And on the stamina as well, you look back to Paddy versus Ferguson, Paddy Pimblett was fading as the fight went on. Max Holloway is one of the best cardio fighters in the UFC, so yeah, this is a bad matchup for Paddy Pimblett. I think Max Holloway pieces him up across 3 rounds or 5 rounds, and I'm going to go Max Holloway to win this one. Pretty comfortable, unanimous decision. And then for Paul Felder versus Tony Ferguson, we've seen Felder at 155 a few times, and obviously Ferguson went on one of the best lightweight runs ever. I'm going to go Tony Ferguson, prime El Kukui, the boogeyman, to beat Paul Felder. Yeah, Paul Felder was a fun fighter in his prime. Very dangerous as well offensively, but again, he got caught way too much, and we've seen Paul Felder get cut before. You go back to the fight with Francisco Trinaldo. Francisco Trinaldo put the absolute pace and cut up Paul Felder like ketchup sandwich. For a guy that takes too much damage against a guy that delivers a lot of damage, I think Ferguson would get a doctor stoppage win over Paul Felder, who would absolutely rough him up with his elbows, get him in the clinch, get him down, rough him up with ground and pound. I think the Ferguson that specifically fought Rafael dos Anjos, he'd put a beating on Paul Felder, cut him up a lot, put an absolute beating on him. So yeah, prime El Kukui, he'd probably finish Paul Felder by some sort of TKO or doctor stoppage. So I'm going to go Tony Ferguson to beat Paul Felder just from pure damage. And then for Alexander Volkanovski against Arman Tsarukyan, a fight that again is kind of intriguing nowadays. I think Volkanovski beats Arman Tsarukyan. I'm talking about the Volkanovski that fought Islam Makhachev. Yeah, Tsarukyan is like Islam Makhachev without the stamina, without the striking, even though I guess their striking is close, and without the submission ability. I see it going very similar to Makhachev versus Volkanovski, except it's a much easier time for Volkanovski. I see Volkanovski defending a lot of the takedowns, getting taken down a few times because Tsarukyan's still a good wrestler, but not as much submission threat from like Islam Makhachev did. And I see Volkanovski putting an absolute, not a beating, but just piecing him up on the feet. I mean, Volkanovski's fought the elite strikers at 145, but even Arman Tsarukyan, I mean, apart from that Benil Dariush knockout, he's never really looked overly impressive on the feet. Like, Oliveira was having success on the feet. He's been clipped before as well as Arman Tsarukyan, so I think Volkanovski would just put an absolute beating on Tsarukyan on the feet, I guess. Probably defends most of the takedowns. Just an easier version of the Makhachev fight. Tsarukyan's a great wrestler, super athletic for the division. And I guess he's still a bit of what's the word? Like, we still don't really know too much about Tsarukyan because his last big fight was Oliveira at 300, but prime Volkanovski, the one that fought Makhachev, he wins a pretty comfortable unanimous decision, in my opinion, over Arman Tsarukyan. And then Usman Nurmagomedov versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. The two Nurmagomedovs taking each other on according to the spin the wheel that they did. Yeah, Khabib wins this one pretty easily. I mean, he'd take him down within ease. I mean, Usman Nurmagomedov's not really known for his grappling. Usman's known more for his striking, so I think you put him against Khabib, the most dominant wrestler in UFC history. He'd take down Usman Nurmagomedov, and I think he'd just keep him on the ground for a lot of the fight, and I think he'd be able to survive on the feet as well. Yeah, Khabib smashes him to pieces on the ground. Usman's obviously got good grappling beat from that Abdulmanap camp, but he's known for his striking. His wrestling's nowhere near on the same level as Khabib. His jiu-jitsu's nowhere near on the same level as Khabib. Prime Khabib takes down Usman Nurmagomedov, and I think he'd smash him as well. I mean, if you go in tit for tat with Paul Hughes, you ain't beating Khabib Nurmagomedov. And then 4, Rafael dos Anjos versus Rafael Fiziev. I mean, yeah, I'm going to have to go Fiziev. I mean, we've seen this fight before. Obviously, it wasn't prime dos Anjos, but I don't think that really matters if we're talking about prime Fiziev. We've seen this fight before. Fiziev clipped him, dropped him, got the finish in the 5th round, and he was winning that fight comfortably as the fight went on anyway. So even though I do think prime dos Anjos would put up a better fight, I'm going to have to go with Rafael Fiziev to win this one. Bit of a passing of the torch matchup. Fiziev's one of the best strikers in the modern era. Stylistically, always been a bad matchup for dos Anjos anyways, and we've seen the fight before. Fiziev wins that one. And then for round 2 of the tournament, we've got Conor McGregor versus Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson would be the type of guy to beat a prime McGregor. He would either get brutally chinned or he'd beat a prime McGregor, because that's just the type of guy Michael Johnson is. But I'm going to go with Conor McGregor to beat Michael Johnson. I mean, it goes without saying. I mean, we've seen Michael Johnson, one of the most inconsistent fighters in the UFC. He could get knocked out by a journeyman and then knock out one of the best, which kind of makes me want to pick McGregor in this situation. But if we're basing this off logic, yeah, I'm going to have to go Conor McGregor to knock out Michael Johnson. We've seen Johnson get clipped before. You put him against McGregor. I'm going to keep going back to the Alvarez fight. The prime McGregor that fought Eddie Alvarez. The elusive McGregor. The motivated McGregor. He's knocking out Michael Johnson and he's doing it with ease. So I'm going to go Conor McGregor to beat Michael Johnson. And then for Edson Barboza versus Charles Oliveira. Yeah, I'm going to go at 155 if they're both in their prime. I'm going to go with Oliveira to beat Edson Barboza pretty comfortably as well. Yeah, Edson Barboza, I mean, he wasn't really known for having bad grappling, but he was never a great grappler. Was Edson Barboza a bit of a kind of a one-trick pony, especially at 155. We've seen him get beaten, by some wrestlers before, albeit against some of the best wrestlers at the time, but we've still seen him kind of struggle against wrestlers. And I think you put him against Oliveira, a BJJ expert, he finds the chin of Edson Barboza pretty comfortably, and he submits Edson Barboza. And we've seen Oliveira against so many high-level strikers. We've seen him against Poirier, we've seen him against Gaethje, we've seen him against the likes of Dariush and Michael Chandler, and some of the even, not prime Tony Ferguson, but, we've seen Oliveira against some good strikers at 155. Even though Barboza would be a tricky guy with the kickboxing that he has, I think Oliveira eventually would get a submission over Edson Barboza. Puts too much pressure on him. Doesn't really care on the feet if he gets dropped. I'm going to go Charles Oliveira to submit Edson Barboza. And then for Dan Hooker versus Gregor Gillespie, prime for prime, I'm going to go with Gregor Gillespie to win this one, man. That's how bought on the hype I am of Gregor Gillespie. This is, I know I'm going a bit off topic here, but I wish he stuck in with the UFC. I wish after that Diego Ferreira win, it had stayed in the UFC, because I think Gregor Gillespie has been one of the best wrestlers we've had in modern history. I see Gregor Gillespie kind of just being a more difficult fight than the Gamrot fight. Obviously, he doesn't have as much to offer on the feet as Gamrot, but I think the pure wrestling of Gregor Gillespie, he just completely nullify Dan Hooker, takes him down round after round, holds him down, could even get a submission as well. I mean, Dan Hooker, he's good enough having good takedown defense, not necessarily good submission defense. So I think Gregor Gillespie could even submit Dan Hooker, but even if he doesn't, I just see Gregor Gillespie's pace, the pressure that he puts on Dan Hooker being too much, and getting a decision whenever Dan Hooker saw. I'm going to go Gregor Gillespie. Again, stylistically, I know Dan Hooker's not known for having bad takedown defense, but I think Gregor Gillespie's grappling pace was that good. We've never seen him really struggle with offensive wrestling in the UFC. He was one of the best prospects at the time. So I'm going to go with Gregor Gillespie to beat Dan Hooker, just with the pure, just pure wrestling pace that he put on people. So I'm going to go Gregor Gillespie. And then for Ilia Topuria versus Dustin Poirier, this fight could have happened recently. Two of some of the best boxers in the UFC. If we're going to talk prime Poirier versus prime Topuria, yeah, Poirier's getting knocked out. Yeah, Poirier just gets clipped a lot. I know he's kind of known for his defense, but he gets clipped a lot. I mean, we saw him get knocked out by Gaethje, albeit past prime Poirier, but he just kind of gets clipped a lot, does Dustin Poirier, for my liking. Great boxer offensively, great boxer technically, but not necessarily the most defensively sound, and I think Topuria just backs him up and slumps him. I think it goes very similar to the Holloway fight. I mean, we've seen Topuria against elite boxers before. We've seen him against Volkanovski, great boxer, knocked him out. We've seen him against Max Holloway, great boxer, knocked him out. I don't think boxers are a kryptonite of Ilia Topuria. In fact, I think they're actually more of a stylistic favour for Ilia Topuria. So I think Dustin Poirier being that classic conventional boxer, even though I think he'd be good offensively, when you're facing a puncher as good as Topuria, I think he'd find the chin of Dustin Poirier and knock him out. So I'm going to go prime Ilia Topuria to knock out prime Dustin Poirier. And then for Islam Makhachev versus Frankie Edgar, I mean, have you seen the size difference between the two of them? I mean, Frankie Edgar is one of the smallest 155ers. Makhachev's one of the biggest. They look 3 weight classes apart. Makhachev towers over Frankie Edgar. Yeah, he'd absolutely smash Edgar to pieces. This would look like, I don't even know, this would look like Chris Barnett versus some women's strawweight. This would be a complete domination from Makhachev. Takes down Frankie Edgar, smashes him, probably chucks him outside the octagon if he wants to. Yeah, easy fight for Makhachev. I mean, it's still crazy to think that these guys fought in the same weight class. Like Frankie Edgar being the fucking midget that he is, Makhachev being the behemoth that he is, both fought at 155. Probably the biggest size differential between two 155 champions. Makhachev wins this one easily. I mean, Frankie Edgar, he'd probably pose a bit of a threat on the feet until Makhachev eventually shoots a takedown and does whatever he wants with him, ragdolls him. So, yeah, he'd get absolutely ragdolled. Makhachev wins this one. And then for Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. I mean, we've seen this one recently. I know people are going to say it wasn't prime Gaethje. Doesn't matter. The fight was way too dominant. Max Holloway, I mean, we've seen the fight before. We saw this at UFC 300. And, yeah, Max Holloway beat the absolute shit out of Justin Gaethje. Even if you take around that big moment in round 5, Holloway was leading this fight. He was up on the scorecards by at least 3 rounds. And then to put the cherry on top, to slump him in the way that he did, this was pure domination from Max Holloway. Any version of Max Holloway beats any version of Justin Gaethje. And he probably does it in, I mean, we've already seen the fight. He does it in amazing fashion. Tony Ferguson versus Alexander Volkanovski, another interesting matchup, but I think Volkanovski beats the crap out of prime Tony Ferguson. I think this goes very similar to Gaethje versus Ferguson, but if anything, it's this fight on steroids because of how slick Volkanovski it was. on the feet. I just see Ferguson taking a complete beating by Volkanovski on the feet. Volkanovski just completely tagging him on the feet, landing on the chin, similar to the Korean zombie fight where Volkanovski is just absolutely tagging on Tony Ferguson. And I think Volkanovski would have his way with him. I don't see any grappling threat from Tony Ferguson. We've seen Volkanovski being able to handle the grappling of Makhachev before. We've seen Volkanovski against better pure strikers than Tony Ferguson. So even though Ferguson's stamina, the pace that he has, and the, you know, that kind of, I guess, gritty style that he has, that's not going to be a problem for Volkanovski. He is a stamina beast himself. He is a gritty fighter himself. Volkanovski probably beats the absolute shit out of Tony Ferguson and probably does it in better fashion than Justin Gaethje did. And then for Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Rafael Fiziev, one of the best strikers versus one of the best grapplers at 155. I'm going to go with Khabib Nurmagomedov to beat Rafael Fiziev. Yeah, I think the wrestling of Khabib again, there's very few 155ers ever who I'd favour to beat Khabib, and if I am going to pick them, they've got to show that they've got great takedown defence. And I mean, to be fair, Fiziev hasn't got bad takedown defence, but we've seen him struggle with the grappling of Gamrot before. I know Gamrot's one of the better wrestlers nowadays at 155, but I think you put him against prime Khabib. We've seen Khabib against guys with good takedown defense before. He's made easy work of them. He submits Rafael Fiziev, in my opinion, within the first couple of rounds. So Fiziev, big threat on the feet. Doesn't matter when you're facing Khabib. Once he gets a hold of you, getting taken down and submitted. Khabib beats prime Rafael Fiziev. And then for round 3, we've got Conor McGregor versus Charles Oliveira, prime for prime. Back in 2021, this is one of the most exciting fights the UFC could have done. But yeah, I'm going to go prime McGregor to beat Charles Oliveira. And I say this because you've got an accurate KO artist in Conor McGregor against a chinny and defenseless guy on the feet in Charles Oliveira. Conor McGregor in his prime was known for landing on the chin. One of the most accurate guys we've seen at 155. And one of the best KO artists we've seen too. And Oliveira gets hit a lot. Got dropped by Poirier, got dropped by Gaethje, got dropped by nearly everybody he's ever fought. You put him against prime Conor McGregor. McGregor starched him early on, in my opinion. I just think Oliveira's chin, he's not going to be able to hold up. He's known for getting hit, is Oliveira. He's known for getting caught. You put him against one of the most accurate guys we've ever seen at 155, one of the best strikers we've seen, prime McGregor. I think he chins Oliveira in the first round, similar to the way that Ilia Topuria did, but possibly even more slick. Gregor Gillespie versus Ilia Topuria. I've been glazing Gregor Gillespie this video, but I'm going to have to tone it down now. I'm going to have to pick Ilia Topuria to beat Gregor Gillespie, because Gregor Gillespie, to be fair, he was nothing but a prospect, and he never fought an elite fighter, even though I think he could have been in the top 5, and his grappling was that good. I can't pick him to beat Ilia when he's never fought an elite fighter before. We saw him get chinned by Kevin Lee on the feet as well, and he's not really known for having the best striking as Gregor Gillespie. So I would trust Ilia Topuria. Even though stylistically this is still a big threat, I trusted to keep this fight standing and within, you know, the first 2 rounds, knock out Gregor Gillespie. And Topuria's never struggled with his grappling before. He comes from a jiu-jitsu background, submitted Bryce Mitchell, shown good takedown defense before, took down Max Holloway as well. So I think Ilia Topuria, it's not just a classic striker versus grappler. It's an A-tier grappler and an S-tier striker against an S-tier grappler in Gregor Gillespie. So Gregor had potential. I'm not picking you to beat Topuria. Topuria slumping Gregor Gillespie out cold. And then for Islam Makhachev versus Max Holloway, who I forgot to change the name to Ilia Topuria, from Ilia Topuria. Yeah, Holloway versus Makhachev. I'm picking Makhachev to beat Max Holloway, prime for prime. It would just be a repeat of Poirier versus Makhachev, in my opinion. If anything, it would be an even easier fight for Islam Makhachev, where I can see, obviously, Holloway having success on the feet, but he's going to be way too tentative, and the second that Makhachev gets a hold of him, he's going to dominate Max Holloway the entire fight and submit Max Holloway, in my opinion, pretty early on in the fight, because Holloway's just not used to grapplers. This guy's fighting at featherweight in his entire career. There's no fucking grapplers in the featherweight division, and most of the grapplers that we've seen him go against, he struggled with. I mean, Ilia Topuria was able to hold down Max Holloway for a couple of minutes. You put him against a big, meaty 155 grappler, one of the best grapplers in the modern era in Islam Makhachev, against a guy who's not used to grapplers. Yeah, Makhachev, he's taking down and submitting Max Holloway with ease, in my opinion. It'd just be a repeat of the Poirier fight. If anything, stylistic and more easy for Islam Makhachev as well. So I'm going to go Makhachev by submission. And then for Volkanovski versus Khabib, one of the biggest what-if fights we've had at 155 recently. This would be a banger. 2 of the all-time greats in their era, but I'm going to go with Khabib to beat Alexander Volkanovski, and I just think it's because Khabib's too dominant of a grappler, and we've seen Makhachev obviously give problems to Volkanovski before. That's why he won the fight, even though it was very close, and even though Volkanovski's got elite wrestling in himself, it's obviously, if there is a style to beat Volkanovski, it is going to be an elite grappler, like an Islam Makhachev, and Khabib's just Islam Makhachev, but 10 times more. 10 times more stamina, 10 times more durability, 10 times more pace, 10 times more strength, 10 times more grappling offense. Maybe not 10 times, I'm over-exaggerating it there, but he's just a way better grappler and way too dominant. So I think if Makhachev's having success with the grappling against Volkanovski, I'd have to trust that Khabib has as well. And we've seen Khabib against strikers before. Striking isn't a stylistic threat of Khabib. So Volkanovski would by far be the biggest test of Khabib's career. It would be a very close fight, similar to the Makhachev fight, but I think the grappling offense and the pace that Khabib would have would just be too big for too much for Volkanovski. And also considering the size as well, the strength that Khabib has at 155 against Alexander Volkanovski, who's obviously a smaller 155er, I'm going to have to go with Khabib to win this one. I think the rest would be too much, so I'm going to have to go with Khabib to beat Volkanovski. And then for round 4, the semi-final, we've got Conor McGregor versus Ilia Topuria, one of the most talked about fights in the lightweight division. Prime for prime, one of the most intriguing fights ever. I'm going to go with Ilia Topuria to beat prime Conor McGregor, and I think it's just because Topuria is way better everywhere the fight goes. First of all, the grappling. McGregor, I mean, if we're talking about prime McGregor, it was only really one fight at 155 in the Eddie Alvarez fight, but if we even go back to his 145-pound days, it's evident that McGregor's not a great grappler. Chad Mendes was able to put him on his back the entire fight, and Ilia Topuria comes from a BJJ background, and even though he's a striker nowadays, he's still one of the best grapplers at 155. I think he'd be able to rough up Conor McGregor with the grappling if he wanted to and do a shit ton of damage on the ground if he wanted to. And then he's got slightly better striking too, in my opinion. I think the boxing, the pure boxing of Topuria, is on a completely different level to prime McGregor. The fact that no matter who he faces, no matter the style, he's able to find the chin with ease. He's able to back people up, land on that fucking chin and slump everybody. I think he'd be able to do it to Conor McGregor. McGregor was very good with his range. He was very good at the distance. He was very good at kind of drawing people in and then countering with a massive shot and knocking them out. Topuria's defensively good. And even though Topuria's more of a pressure fighter, he likes to get people against the cage. He likes to play that range game better than most people, and he's got the grappling to back it up, and he's got the power to back it up, and he's got the pure boxing to back it up. And we've seen McGregor with countless different flaws. We've still yet to see a Topuria flaw. I'm gonna have to go prime Topuria to knock out Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor was good in his prime, but his prime only really lasted at 155, the Eddie Alvarez fight. So I'm gonna have to go Ilia Topuria to knock out Conor McGregor. And then for Islam Makhachev versus Khabib, the brothers, obviously not actual brothers, but the two training partners, the two Dagestani kings at 155, who would obviously never fight each other, but in a theoretical matchup, I think Islam Makhachev beats Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think this is the worst matchup for Khabib Nurmagomedov in 155-pound history. And I say this because Khabib is a better grappler than Makhachev. There's no doubt in that. He is more dominant. Like I said earlier, more dominant, better stamina, whatever. He's a better grappler than Islam Makhachev. But I don't think it's that dominant to the sense that I think he, you know, he's able to completely, like, you look at who he's beaten as well, Khabib. He's beating strikers mainly at 155. And I don't think the gap between Khabib and Makhachev's grappling is that big enough to the point where Khabib can just use that grappling to win the fight. Because Makhachev, I mean, first of all, is a big 155er, and he's probably the second best grappler we've had in modern history to Khabib. And the grappling differential, like I said, is big, but it's nowhere near as big as like a Khabib versus Poirier or a Khabib versus Gaethje. So even though the grappling exchanges would go in the favor of Khabib, what about the stand-up? I think the stand-up is the bigger gap. Makhachev's a way better striker than Khabib. Way more power, way more dribble on the feet, handles shots a lot better too. Khabib was a fucking shit striker in his prime, awful striker, and that all these eggs were in one basket. In grappling and none were in striking. Makhachev's got maybe a few less eggs in grappling, but a couple more in striking. So I see this being one of those fights where there isn't really much grappling going on. I think Makhachev keeps his fight standing for most of the fight against Khabib, and I think he completely pieces him up on the feet. I think if there is a one bad matchup for Khabib, it's going to be somebody like Makhachev, who has, you know, pretty close wrestling to Khabib and just way better stand-up. So I think stylistically, not a great fight for Khabib. People are going to bring the psychological effect of kind of Khabib being the mentor of Makhachev and Makhachev letting it win, but I'm talking about stylistically. I don't think Khabib beats Makhachev. Yes, he's a better grappler. Yes, he's more dominant with the ground game, but not that much more to the point where he's going to be able to dominate Makhachev like he's dominating Justin fucking Gaethje. So, yeah, I'm going to go Makhachev to beat Khabib, keeps the fight standing, and just, you know, beats him on the feet. Probably more physical as well. I know Khabib's strong as well for 155, but physically, Makhachev's a behemoth for this division. So, I'm going to pick Makhachev to beat Khabib. And then the finale, Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. What makes this so frustrating is we were so close to this fight this year. We could have had this fight this year. If Belal Muhammad wouldn't have fucked up and beat JDM, this would have been the fight that took place at UFC 317, but unfortunately it didn't. But who do I think wins between Makhachev and Topuria? I can't say with too much confidence, but I'm going to have to go with a confident Ilia Topuria to knock out Islam Makhachev, because Topuria's confidence, I feel like he's one of those fighters where anything Topuria says with confidence, you've got to believe him. He said he's going to knock out Volkanovski, he did it. Says he's going to be the first guy to chin Max Holloway, did it. Said he's going to be the first guy to beat Charles, not first guy to beat, but he said he's going to chin Oliveira, did it. And he's undefeated too, and he's the biggest puncher in the sport. And I see it be this weird triangle where Makhachev beats Khabib, Khabib would have beat Topuria, but Topuria would have beat Islam Makhachev. I see this kind of being the weird triangle at 155 between the top 3 guys in the finale, but I ultimately think Ilia Topuria would chin Islam Makhachev. And historically as well, Makhachev kind of struggles against boxers. You saw him against Dustin Poirier. Yes, he won that fight comfortably. Well, not comfortably, he won that fight, but Poirier brought the fight to him. And what is Poirier? A boxer. The fight with Volkanovski. Volkanovski roughed up Islam Makhachev. What is Volkanovski? A boxer. Now we're facing a guy who's got better boxing than those guys, more dangerous boxing than those guys, put the touch of death, and he's got better grappling than those guys too. I think Topuria is a terrible fight for Makhachev, and I think he slumps him as Islam Makhachev if he wanted to. That would be my 155-pound tournament. The ultimate winner is Islam Makhachev, is Ilia Topuria, but it could have been Makhachev, it could have been Khabib, it could have been Topuria, it could have been however that triangle ended out, but ultimately, the top 3 are Makhachev, Khabib, and Topuria. Let me know your thoughts on this tournament, if you'd agree with the fights, if I should have included any more fighters, and what your all thoughts are on this kind of video idea as well, this tournament kind of style of idea. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you.